Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be having a look at a new development in the Toddle ecosystem, which is the launch of the Spark UI component toolkit. Now, ever since Toddle has launched, the vision and the approach of the Toddle team has been to essentially leave the development of UI kit components to the community, and they released something called packages about a year ago to be able to enable us to do that. But there hasn't been kind of a settled native component kit for Toddle. And so the Spark guys, Max and Franz, have, in conjunction with the Toddle guys, have launched their own Spark component kit. So come over to packages here, we can see that we have the Spark core package. Okay, it's already shifted quite high to the list, even though it's only been available for less than a week at this point. Now, previously people used other things, various different UI kits such as Shoelace style, but they are reliant on an underlying JavaScript and CSS framework, in this case Shoelace. And Shoelace is fantastic, there's no doubt about it. A lot of people have used it, it really is great, but it's not native to Toddle. It's a wrapper around a JavaScript library. But what the guys at Spark have done is to develop a completely Toddle native component kit. So in other words, it's not relying on an underlying framework or library. And what they've actually done is, if we go into the Spark core package here and we get the little documentation. So Spark core is a UI component library for Toddle that helps developers build high quality accessible web apps in Toddle. It is inspired by the fabulous Radix UI primitives library. Okay, so if we look at Radix UI, we can see that it's essentially a component library, but a very low level. So the idea is it built it so that other people will build their own libraries on top of a core library. And there's various different libraries that are built on top of Radix. Probably one of the most popular is ShadCN, which is this one here, which a lot of JavaScript and web developers use. And it really is fantastic. It's kind of it's built with Tailwind, but it's built upon Radix, okay? And a lot of people use this. It really is a fantastic library. So what the Spark guys have done, essentially, is to take the same approach, is to build a core library, like Radix, to build all their basic components on, and then anybody, including themselves, can build on a full UI library styled however that you want it to work. So what they've done is they've created the Spark core, and then they've created another library which is much more closer to essentially what you would expect to work with a component UI kit called Spark 1. Okay, so Spark 1 is, it says here that the Spark core is designed for advanced developers who need complete control of the component architecture. This library provides low-level primitives and complex accessibility features that require a deep understanding of Toddle and Toddle's component system. If you prefer a simpler solution, Spark 1 is the starter template. So we click on that, we can get the page for Spark 1, okay, and then that gives us the information on there. Now, one of the key things about the Spark framework, the Spark core and the Spark 1 component library, is that they're essentially ARIA compliant, they're accessibility compliant, and this is going to be quite important moving forward. So we'll come to the Mozilla Developer Network docs, okay, and if we do a search for ARIA, let me see, we get this option here, and we can see that it says that ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and it's a set of roles and attributes that define ways to make web content and web applications more accessible to people with disabilities. So the fact that it's baked in, that it supports ARIA, is really great, because you want your users who have disabilities to be able to use your application, but also that there are also legislative considerations with this, in terms of the EU are going to be introducing some new regulations later this year. I think they're already in play in other parts of the world, including the US. So it is going to be increasingly more important that your application is accessibility compliant. So ARIA will give you that, and therefore if you use the Spark components, then you will essentially, your application will be compliant with this, which is, as I say, is going to be really important. So that's a big consideration in terms of using the Spark 1 rather than developing your own. Now, the native HTML elements that you use as standard, which Toddle gives you out of the box, are already ARIA compliant. You don't need to worry about that. But usually we need to build our own components, or we use somebody else's components to give us more functionality than what the standard HTML elements will give us. And it's important that whoever builds those has built those with accessibility in mind, and definitely the Spark components are. Okay, so let's have a look at Spark 1 then. So essentially, a powerful UI template for toddle.dev built on Spark, the foundation of Spark Core, our unstyled component library. Okay, so these are styled exactly how the guys at Spark wanted them to be, maybe for their own internal use. So if you really want to build out your own self-styled components, and you use core and build on top of that, but you just want to use these out of the box, which is what we're going to do in this video, because it's a little bit too in-depth to start going into Spark Core, and I by no means am an expert on that by any means. I'm not an expert on this either really, but I can sort of give you the guidelines, the starting point to get going with these, because they're not immediately obvious what you need to do. So if we look on the left hand side, we've got all of these different components that he does give us. There's quite a lot there which are really, really handy, going to give us a lot of functionality that we don't have to build out ourselves anymore. Let's start off with a really, really simple one, and that is the checkbox component. So we click on this and we can see that essentially we've got a single component there called SO checkbox. So if we come into here, let's create a new page. And I'll just call this demo. Okay, now one of the things that I want to mention about Spark 1 is that it is not a package that comes with Toddle. So you won't see a Spark, when you go into packages, you won't see a Spark 1 package library. And the reason being is that it's very opinionated about how it's styled. And that essentially requires built-in themes. So the way that you do it is, let's say I'm coming out into my project page, okay, and you go to create an app. Then what you'll have to do is to create the app from the Spark 1 template. So then you'll get all of those Spark 1 components in there, and also all of its styling and theming that they've got built in. So back in our project then, what you can see, I've already done that in here to build off the Spark 1 template. And so if we look in here, that gives us all of these components. Some part of Spark, some are just things that they built into this particular project. Now obviously you use the ones that you want to use, however they are sat on the main homepage that they give you, okay, in here, so we can look through those as well. So we look at let's get these components out of the way, and we go to the themes. We can see that they've basically developed their own theming system that's separate to the default one that comes with Toddle. And again, this is based on Radix. So if we go over to Radix and go to colors, we can see that we get all of these different color palettes that Radix uses, and essentially the Spark 1 component builds off of those. So that's why we need the template rather than just install a package, because packages don't come with predefined styles, whereas projects and templates do. So we can see that they've also got their own styling themes around spacing, quite in depth, and the fonts that they use and the font sizes. And again, you know, you can change any of these if you want to, just to make small changes. But if you're really going to make big changes, then probably you are better off going to Spark Core and building on top of Spark Core. Right, so let's get going. Let's have a look at go to our demo page. Let's have a look at the checkbox. So before we get going, we need to add a component onto our page, which is the daddy of Spark components that you have to have there, and everything else feeds off of that. And this is what we call the provider. So we'll go and add a component, and then I go to provider. We can see we've got one called SC provider. So when you see SC, that means you're pulling directly from the Spark Core library. When you see SO, you're pulling from the Spark 1 library. So let's do the provider. We don't need to do anything other than that. It just has to sit there, and then everything else that we put then on our page, especially related to the Spark components, has to live in here. Okay, so we click on that, and then we can add our checkbox component. So there we go, SO checkbox. Okay, and just adds it on the screen there. And this actually works straight out of the box, so all we need to do is to run that, and then we can see that that just works great. However, we're not storing any state with that, obviously, so what we can do is we can add a variable, and let's call it selected. Let's give it the value of false initially, and then come to the component. Under attributes, we can then set the checked attribute to that variable, selected, and also respond to the event when it's changed. So we get an on check change event, and then we can just say set selected, and then all we need to do then is to say event and is checked, and then that so we don't need to do a toggle. The component deals with that for us. So again, we run that. No different. It's just that now we're picking up the state in a variable that we can actually use outside of that component. So really straightforward one. The docs just give us some there. We can give it an ARIA label, which is really important because that essentially gives anybody with accessibility issues, they can actually, if they've got using the screen reader, for example, then that gives them a better explanation of what's in the element by reading from the ARIA label. So sometimes that can be quite handy to use, and we can give it a HTML ID, okay, and the checked that we just used, and then obviously we used the event that was there. One of the other things that's great about the Spark components, again in being ARIA compliant, is that it really works well with the keyboard. If you start developing your own components, let's say you build your own drop down or even your own checkbox, to make it ARIA compliant, it's got to work with keyboard, key presses, and that can be a real pain to do. So the Spark components deal with that for us. Right, so what's next? What should we look at next? So I'm going to look at something a bit more in depth. The one that I like to look at is select, which sometimes you call it a drop down. They do have a drop down. That's more like drop down menus than the select. So you can call it the select. And this one is a little bit more in depth. So this one we've got to drop an SO select component on there, and then that's got two slots, one called trigger and one called content. So essentially then what you're doing is you're giving something that's going to trigger that drop down and the actual content of the drop down. So what we've got to do then, let's start off by adding the SO select button on there. Again, we've got to do that inside the provider or descended from the provider in our tree. So I'm going to do SO select. Okay, and what we've got on the SO select is a few attributes. What's the value? What's the value that you want to use? Again, we can attach that to a state, a variable, and then we get an on value change when somebody selects something different in the drop down. But as you get more in depth into Spark 1, the essentially the components, the way that you build it up is they're composed, they're composable. So rather than just being one monolithic component that you deal with, and that's got everything, including all the events, all of the attributes, you're dealing with a kind of a header component, and then everything within that can be very flexible. You can include exactly what you want to make that work, and so it is very composable. The checkbox is a little bit different. That's just one component on its own. But in this one, we've got to be a little bit more composable in the way that we build this up. So the next one is we need something to go in the trigger slot of SO select, and this is the SO button. So let's do that. SO button. So is it select button? Okay, SO. What did I say? SO button. So when we say that, there is no SO button, there's primary button and there's secondary button and various other ones. This one will go for secondary. Okay, and then we're going to need to give that a name. Give that a name in there, and then we'll just give that, let's say, select an option. Okay, and the reason nothing's been displayed there is because, like it says in there, we've got to give it the slot of trigger. So we go back to the button there, and then we can go to attributes, and then we can select it's the trigger. Okay, and so let's give this button a width. By the way, this is another change that has come very recently. pretty much at the same time as this, is that we can now style directly on our own components or anybody else's components, rather than have to put it inside a div and then style the div. We can now do it in here, and what that does then is override any styles that are set directly in the top level of this component. So here, what we can do is it just overrides those components as well, the styles, sorry. Right, let's back to there. Okay, so now what we can do is to give it the content. So we need an SO select content component. Let's do that again inside the select. So we can do SO select content. Righty-ho, and then we need to attach that to the content slot. Okay, and so if we run that now, we click it, we can see that something happens there as well. Okay, let's go back here. We can see actually on the button we can add an SO select icon, so that's going to give us that little chevron that we need, and we have to add that inside the button. So let's do that. So inside the button we'll do E, and we'll do SO select icon. Okay, so let's get this button to be, again, it's great that we can style it, so let's do a width of 260. Okay, and then I'm going to make that a row container, and then just space between, so we get them either side, the icon and the label within the button itself. So okay, so now we can build the content. So let's have a look at what it's telling us about that. So within the SO select content, then we need to have select items, the individual items in the drop down. So let's do that then. We can do then E and then SO select item. Okay, and then let's give that a text. Okay, and then let's do option 1. Let's just do a quick copy of that one, and then we can say it's option 2. Okay, and then run that. Okay, fantastic. So what we've got at the minute is they're both ticked, even though quite clearly only one can be. So what I can do then is in attributes on value, I can give that a specific value that represents. So for example, I can say that is 1, and this one is 2. Okay, and then it will know when we click it which one to tick to say selected. So I do this one. Okay, drop it down again. Yep. We can see that works fine. Just by giving it a value so that the select component knows exactly what's going on. And then what we can do on the select, then we have our event for on value change, so we can put a workflow behind when something changes. Before we do that, what's really important is that you probably can imagine you don't want to be doing this every single time, putting together your own select tree here and composing that from the different Spark components. You just want to effectively wrap that in your own component and then just use that wrapped component whenever you want. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click and I'm going to wrap that in a div component, div element. So right click and select extractors component, and I'll just call this I'm going to call this drop down, even though the Spark guys don't call it that. Okay, so my drop down. Okay, so now I've got this component in here, and so what I can do then is to add some attributes. So for example, I want them to pass in the options that are included in this component, so I can just say options, and I'm just going to set that as an array initially. Okay, sorry, not initially, as a test value. Okay, and then I want to get rid of this second one here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to repeat that over the options that they pass in. And then what I want to do is then when they click on an option, which is exposed via the on value change event, again, this is all in the docs. We come down here, we can see that we get, where are we? Okay, on value change, event handler called when the selected value changes. Okay, so then on that one, what we can do is to set an internal state. So we can say in here, we can say get a variable selected. Let's give it the value of 0 for now. And so when they do that, we can just set that variable set selected, so we're holding state and it gives a selected value. That's the value, by the way, not of the label itself, but of the selected item when we do the value here. So where we've just got this in the slot, which is just a label, is the value that it really cares about. Okay, so we've done that. Now we need an event in here to fire this back out to its container. So let's say set on selected. Okay, test value, just put 0 in there, and then what we can do in our value change is simply then trigger that event on selected. Okay, and then what we're going to do then is just to pass it the value of the item that's been selected. Okay, and so then back out in the demo page now, if we run that, okay, we're going to get nothing because we haven't passed any options. Let's do that. So in here, let's say I'm going to pass in, what I will do actually is I'm going to do range, and that's going to generate an array for however many elements that I want. So I'm going to do, let's say I'm going to do 0 to 6, and what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to map this. Okay, I'm going to map it into an object. So when we do mapping, is essentially we're saying we get an array of just numbers. So if I get rid of that at the minute, we just get an array of numbers in here. So I want a little bit more information than that. So I'm going to map it to transform each item from that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call it an object, and I'm going to get essentially a value, and I'm going to get a label. Okay. Okay, and then I can say that the value is going to be the item, which is the number, and the label is then going to be, I'm going to concatenate, if I can spell it right, concatenate. I'm just going to say that I want option space and then the value, the item. Okay, and so now we get an object with a value, and it says option 1 is option 0. Just let me change that one from there. Let's say we want it from 1 to 6. Okay, that's great. Okay, so that's the list of options we pass in. So if we run that now, then we're now going to get the option. Okay, so at the minute I haven't in the component in here. Sorry, let's duplicate that and let's get a different tab open, and then we can go into the component more easily. Okay, and so now what we can do is set the value to be the items, and actually rather than set things up, I'm just going to go and get the value. Okay, and then what we can do then is in here we can then set this up to read from the items. Again, I'm just going to use get. I'm just going to call this label, I think I called it. Okay, let's try that. Refresh the page. Okay, and then we get our options in there, and then we can see that then selects it. Now, ideally what you'd want is that when you click an option, that then is displayed up here. So that's kind of the select. As you can see, it does a lot for you. It does all of the core things that you need it to do, but it's composable, so you can have it working exactly how you want in your application. So that's that one. So now let's look at a couple of other things as well in here. Let's have a look at fields up here, because obviously that's something you're going to use quite a lot of. So look at the architecture of it in the doc. So we've got the SO field, so that's like the container, and then we give it a label and field text. So I think what these are is that you can either have a field text or you can have a field email, depending what content you want in there. So you've got password, you've got field, you've got email, etc. So we actually have a look in their home page, and let's just run that and scroll down. So let me expand that out. Then we can see, where's field? There we go. So we can see that this is what you get. So we've got standard text, then we've got a password, then we've got an email. And so based on those, depending on what you want, that is where you select in there whether you want the field text, the field email, the field number, whatever it is that you want to do. So, and also in the text, you also get the slots for left and right. So that's how you get the, and we were looking at that a moment ago, that's when you get the ability to put your icons left and right within the field itself. So the first one then is SO field, so let's do that. Okay, let's go back out to the demo page. Again, inside the provider, we're going to do ESO field. Okay, now obviously I'm not going to go through every single component in this video, it's going to take too long, but if there's any components that you want me to sort of cover, I'm quite happy to do a quick video on those, you know, maybe put them in a playlist or something. But at the minute I'm just going to go through a few more and then we'll call it a day. The idea is to give you a general grasp of how this works, so that it's not as, there's a certain way in which it works. Okay, and so then we want a field label. Field label, okay. And then I'm assuming then that we need to put a little text in there to give it the field name. So let's say, we just say enter your name or something like that. Okay, and then we're going to say, yeah, we just want the field text on this one. So let's do that. Now, is that contained within the field? No, it's not. It's contained within the field. So we then do ESO field text. Then that gives us a text box. And I think that this is then where we can put the SO field icon and attach it to either the left or the right slot, depending on what we want. So let's put it to the left, as it says there. So SO field icon, let's do that. Field icon, okay. We need to put that into the slot, the left-hand slot, and then let's give it an icon. Go to Iconify, let's have a look. Let's say we want name or something. Let's do one of these here. Let's do this one. Okay, it's a bit big, but we can size it. Okay, so let's just drop that in there. That's fine. Let's just, on the SVG, let's just size it to say 24 by 24. Okay, that's better. Right, okay, is there anything else that we need to do there? So obviously these are the ones that we want. So field info could be useful. So if we look down here, that should tell us, let's have a look, where are we? Info, contain for additional information or help associated with the field. Let's give that a go. Where does that live? That actually lives in the main field, that's fine. So field, let's do ESO field info. Okay, and so I think we can then drop the text into there. Okay, and then we can say that please enter your name so that we can track everything you do ever. Okay, so there we go. So let's just run that and let's do Keith. Okay, now again, you'd wrap that in the component, in its own component. You wouldn't generally have all of this going on for every field, every input box, every field that you want on in your system there. And obviously what we've got on the field is we've got the value, so we could have a variable called name on there. Let's start off with a blank value. Okay, and then what we can do is in the field we can say bind that field to that name variable, and then we've got an event for on change and on input, which is handy, which is similar to what you would get normally on an input. Okay, so we can then say we're going to set the name to the value that it gives us, which is quite handy. And so what we can do then, let's say this field info, let's hook it up to the name variable length, and so if we run that, then I can we can't see that because it's in there, so let's just give that we can style that with a bit of a colour just to give it the neutral. There we go, so let's run that. Okay, Okay, so that's the field input. So again, we're composing these things. It's really important to use the documentation, because it really gives you exactly what's going on, because they use extensive use of slots in there which help you composite all of these things. And it's all taken advantage of context, because everything is essentially being controlled by its parent component, and then in turn we have the SC provider that's controlling everything else. Right, okay, so one thing that I was really interested in was the tooltip, because I'd really like tooltips in application. It makes an application really feel like somebody's gone to the nth degree, and I actually love the way that they've implemented the tooltip. It's really, really simple, really easy. Especially now we've gone through the other ones, this will be really simple for you to do. So, okay, where are we? We need to be on our own page there, so let's close that one up. SC provider, let's add a component into that, and let's look for the tooltip. SO tooltip. Okay, let's go to the docs. Tooltip. There we go. So essentially, what it needs is two slots in the SO tooltip. It needs a trigger, and it needs the content. Okay, so the trigger then is going to be the component that you actually hover over to trigger the tooltip. So then what we can do then is simply let's say we could put our field within our tooltip, okay, and then what we could do then is give that assign that to the trigger slot of its container. So now we need let's have a look, we need the tooltip text in there, okay, so go there and we'll do SO tooltip text, okay. And so what I'm going to do there is just add a text, okay, and then we'll say please enter your name. It is a compulsory thing you must do, okay. And so now that should just work. Actually, just let me make sure I've got to add it to I've got to add it to the content slot, otherwise it won't work. So let's run that. So if there we go, that's beautiful. How easy was that? That's fantastic. I absolutely love that. We go to the tooltip, we can see that we've got a couple of things that we can do. Disable hoverable content. Okay, we've got on open chain, so we can do something when the tooltip is open. So again, it leaves it open for us to do whatever we want. But we can sort of see that most of these, especially like with tooltips and like with the drop downs, we've got a trigger, and then we've got the content that's displayed once that trigger occurs. So one last one we'll have a look at that's also going to take advantage of that, going to use that method, is the dialog. So if we go into the document, in fact, let's have a look at it in their own thing. Let's run that. And let's go to the dialog, okay. And so the way it works is, it's fine, looks great. Okay, so we will use that. Again, if you want to come in here and have a look at those things just to see how they've done them, you look at section component there, we can just scroll down and we should see dialog. There we go, example dialog. And then we go in there and we can see exactly what they've done. So let's build that out here. So again, in the docs, let's go to the dialog section. Where are we? Dialog, okay. So we can see that it looks complicated, but it really isn't. What we've got is the dialog, which has got two slots, a trigger and a content. So we need a button to trigger the dialog, and then the dialog content itself, and then we can give it a header, description, and a footer where we can put our buttons at the bottom. Again, completely composing them from different components. So let's give that a go, and then we can just say that we want the dialog component, SO dialog, and so we need I think it was the SO button. So let's use the tertiary one now. Okay, again, we've got to assign that to the slot, the trigger slot, and then we'll see it. Okay, let's just add a little text label there, and then we can assign to say open dialog. Okay, and now we need the content. So now the content is, we need the dialog and SO dialog content first and foremost. So let's do that. In an SO, if I can type, it needs to be dialog, doesn't it? Dialog content. There we go. Now this is just a container for the rest of it, okay? But it does need to go in the slot, so we need to put it in the content slot, which is good. And then we need the header, dialog description, dialog footer. Okay, so let's do that. So then we can do E, and then we can say, let's go just search for header, SO dialog header, that will do. Next one is the description, SO dialog description, and then we can do E and then SO dialog footer. There we go. Okay. So the header, again, we can just put in a text in there, and we can then just say this is a special dialog. It really isn't. It's just a bog standard dialog, actually, although it's very special because we're using Spark. So let's do the text, and then we can say this is a very special dialog just for you, and or if you happen to be French, pour vous. I'll tell you what, let's go crazy, let's put it in German as well, and let's put it in fact in Spanish, because I am not multilingual by any means, but at least I know how to say those phrases. Okay, so then the footer, now we need to add some buttons in there. Let's have a look. It wants the SO dialog button primary and secondary, so in other words, like you get the OK and the cancel in there. So let's do that. SO dialog button. Okay, so in the footer, SO dialog dialog, let's go and search. Yep, dialog button, SO dialog button primary, SO dialog secondary, so let's do that one. And again, we'll do the E and the text in there, and we'll just say that is okay. Okay, and then we can then do E, SO dialog button secondary, right? Okay, and then we can just add a text in there. Okay, I'm trying to get this done as fast as I can, and actually I'm being too hasty. As my mother once said, more haste, less speed. So let's slow it down and just get it right. Okay, so there we've got all of our dialogue in there. Now again, it looks a little bit long-winded, but you wouldn't do it everywhere. You would simply maybe have a dialogue component, and then you would deal with that within its own component. So let's now run that, and let's see what we get. This is a special dialogue just for you. Okay, and then we can close it, cancel it. Okay, and then we can do that. And if we want to deal with the result of that, of the thing, let's go to the dialogue. In here, we then have an event for on open change. Okay, so I'll stop there. I won't go any deeper into it, but you can kind of get the gist of what's going on with it, the thought process that the guys from Spark had when they were developing this, which is to make it extremely composable. So I hope that was useful. If you want me to make any videos just demonstrating how to do a particular component, because there's lots and lots of them, as you can inevitably see when we run this, there's tons of stuff that we can cover, and maybe a short video on the ones that you want me to cover would be maybe handy. But I hope it's given you an intro to get going with it. It's only been out a week. I haven't played a great deal with it, so even I'm fairly new to it. But I hope that's maybe, if you didn't know where to start, that's giving you a little bit of a heads up. All right. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to, if you enjoy the content. Until the next one, take it easy.